for us to press the record button. But I'm done. I will turn it over to Cynthia.
Thank you so much, Lindsay, and thank you, Astrid. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Thanks also to everybody who's here in the room with us today. It's great to be able to be sharing these materials with teachers. So what I'm going to do today is present what I think of as a project-based learning opportunity for you to roll out to your students. And the idea of it is that you train your students to be a census ambassador. And what is a census ambassador exactly? It is somebody who reduces the undercount in their community by supporting people to fill out the census. It's somebody who understands some census basics, including that there is a new deadline. And believe me, this has been a constantly shifting target, this deadline, but right now the deadline is September 30th. A census ambassador could explain to people about how their information is protected, what laws protect their information, and also could support somebody to fill out the census. So there's a certain amount of nitty-gritty and kind of document literacy, and then there's also like larger understanding about the importance of the census and what it's all about. A census ambassador could track and report back on their work. So you're giving your student not just a tool, the leadership tools and the content and knowledge tools to be able to go out and talk to people, but then also to track their work, which kind of has a certain accountability to it. And they receive a small cash prize thanks to the National Coalition for Literacy, which is offering a $20 gift card to everybody who takes the pledge to be a census ambassador. And I'll tell you more about how your students can get that later on. Also, a census ambassador would have something to add to their resume under volunteer work. I mean, this is a big deal, what they would be doing, and it involves a lot of work skills. And so putting that on their resume would be part of the activity of being a census ambassador. And meanwhile, all along the way, they've honed their basic skills, they've developed their leadership, and they've also, what you might say particularly important during this pandemic period is they've developed a connection to their community. So let's start by just reviewing why the census is important. So I have three main reasons up here to share with you today, and I know you might be familiar with these already, but I like to just kind of run through them really quickly so everybody is at the same starting place. First of all, it's really important for our democracy because the census count is at the root of the apportionment decisions. So the House of Representatives, you get a certain number of members of the House of Representatives depending on your population count, not your count of citizens, but your count of people, all people. And there's also, that's true for national government, but also a lot of aspects of local government as well. So that's one reason why the census is really important. This map shows which states stand to gain or lose seats in the House based on the upcoming census count. It also determines how much money your state gets from the federal government. And the money that you get from the federal government goes to things like healthcare, schools, libraries, infrastructure, roads, employment, all sorts of things. So a lot of money is at stake for our communities. And that's another reason why the census is so important and why an undercount can really have a negative effect on our communities. Just to get more data about that, this is a really interesting website that you could go to. The George Washington Institute for Policy has put together this Counting for Dollars. And they have figured out how much Minnesota stands to get in 2020 from the federal government. And they even have a per person amount, a per capita amount. And then they list the top 16 programs that Minnesota has that is funded by the federal government. So, this would be an interesting document to look at with your students possibly. I mean, it's a little bit of a hard document. Some of the words are hard, but they would recognize certain benefits in here that they may benefit from, like Medicaid, for example, or the SNAP program, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. So these are important, or Section 8 housing. So these are all things that really matter to our communities and directly affect our communities. And so kind of inspiring students with this background information might help them want to become census ambassadors and be able to explain to others why it matters so much. According to the data from that study, Minnesota has a per capita federal income apportionment of $1,532 per person per year. And so if a family of 5 is undercounted, and this is going to be true now for the next 10 years because the census is not going to happen again until 2030. So then over this 10-year period, if this one family of 5 is not counted, the state would lose $76,600. So there's a little math, you could do with your students. You could figure out different family sizes. You could figure out, you could look at the undercount in your community and think about how many people aren't getting counted, how much that's going to cost that community. There's lots of math you could do here to kind of fire up your census ambassadors. Here's the third reason that I like to add about the role of the census in your community, and that is that the private sector really uses this data. So businesses look at the data to try to decide where to set up businesses, where they will be able to hire people. What are the demographics of certain areas? Will they be needing more nursing homes? Will they be needing more preschools? Nonprofits use that same data to figure out what kinds of grants to go for. What adult ed uses this data to figure out where to set up adult ed programs, how many people they'll need to serve, what the program should look like. So a lot of decisions are made based on the decennial census. So it's really, really important to kind of give this background when you're training your census ambassadors so that they can see why it really matters. And when they get that, and assume they've already gotten their postcard from the Census Bureau telling them, to go online and fill out the census, or they've gotten the hard copy of the questionnaire. And, it just looks like another piece of bureaucratic stuff that you have to do that you don't want to do. And you figure maybe you'll do it later, or maybe it ends up in the garbage. And that might shift if people understand this background and understand why it's so important. So I thought it would be interesting to play around a little bit with this interactive map, because I think this is a great teaching tool for so many reasons. It's a map that the Census Bureau updates, I think, weekly. And so this is what the map looks like when you first click on it and you see the whole country. And if it's not too small, you can see from the key that the darker the blue, the better the self-response rate is so far. So this is very up-to-date data. So you can see Minnesota is a fairly dark blue, North Dakota, South Dakota, lighter blue, Montana, Wyoming, even lighter blue. From what I can tell, New Mexico and West Virginia are the most undercounted states so far. Their self-response rates are the lowest. So this is just counting self-response rates. The Census Bureau doesn't only depend on self-response rates. If it doesn't hear from you, it's going to try to call you or go knock on your door. But what this map is counting is who has actually gone online, filled out the census, or returned the paper copy of the census, and that their information has been tabulated. So that is a self-response, and that is what this map is counting. So the interesting thing about the map, though, is that you can really drill down and get a lot more detail. So if you open the map and you start to zoom in on your area, you see that, let's just take Minnesota, for example, there's a lot of diversity within the state of Minnesota about what's really going on there. So what happens is it washes out and averages out to sort of look a certain color blue, certain shade of blue. But if you look closer, you see that there's parts of Minnesota that are tremendously undercounted right now. And I believe that this version, this is a screenshot from when I was looking at the map. I believe this is counties. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually share, I'm going to show you the map itself. So I've gone now to sharing my browser window, and you can see the map. And I'm going to zoom out a little bit. So this is Minnesota. And I'm going to show you some things you can do. And then what I'm actually going to do is ask Christine to drop the link to this map into the chat. And I'm going to send you off on a field trip where I'm going to have you look at this map yourself and try some of the different things that you can do with the map, including look over here at the key and notice that right now it is sorted by county. One thing I think is very interesting to look at is to look at it by census tract. Okay, so you can click that on and the whole map regroups and shuffles about. And now you have even more detail, and you can zoom in even closer, and you can find the exact census tract that your school is in, perhaps, or the census tract. You know, your students might not live in the same census tract where the school is located. They can find the census tract that they live in. And I would like for you now to go on this field trip, if you'll kindly do so. I hope everybody has a laptop or a computer available, and you can just open a tab and drop in the link from the chat and zoom in, shift over to census tract, and just explore this map and look at all the data that's on the left-hand side. And I want you to think about it as an adult ed teacher. You know, what would you do with your students with this map? What would you have them look at? How would you use it as a teaching tool? And just be ready to come back and drop into the chat, you know, some ideas. So I'm going to give you a few minutes, maybe 3 or 4 minutes to look it over, and then we'll come back. We don't have waiting room music, so there's going to be a little bit of silence. Okay, well, let me know if you, or let me just start to call you back. I hope you've had a little bit of a chance to see some of the ways you could explore this map and think about how you might want to share it with students. What do you think students would think about it? You know, would they be interested? What would they get from it? How would it kind of contribute to a census ambassador training if you do decide to take on this training? You know, what might it do for that? Yeah, so come on back, minimize your browser, come back to the PowerPoint. I'm still sharing my screen. I'm gonna leave the map open where it is right now. And I'm just gonna ask you to either drop into the chat your ideas, but I know sometimes it's hard to kind of quickly type your ideas. So we're not a huge group here, so we could have you unmute and say something. Lindsay says she can share. Oh, that would be awesome, Lindsay. Could you unmute and go ahead and offer your ideas?
Yeah, so I was thinking about this in terms of like a math lesson and what the percentages mean. And so, you know, having students maybe look up the population numbers in different counties or tracts, and then kind of say, okay, well, how many people are not being counted, and kind of getting some more raw numbers, and then being able to compare, like 50% over here is different than 50% over here. And so kind of trying to help them see the raw numbers and make sense of the percentages.
That is such an important concept to grasp, you know, what the difference between hard numbers and percentages. I love that idea. And I love the idea of sending people off to do that level of research, because that's part of the whole digital literacy skills that you'd be building up, you know, is people learning how to go find information to answer a question. Thank you, Lindsay. What about others? Would you like to unmute yourself and just say what looked cool about the map and what you think might be good to share with students? I have permission to call on people. So I might call on you, but you know, you can always pass if you don't feel like talking, but I'll give you any volunteers. Didn't we have
Yes,
yeah, go ahead.
Yvonne.
Who is it?
So, Yvonne Reed.
Hi, Yvonne.
Yeah, so one thing that I believe they could do, they could look within their state and then drill down perhaps to the county level, and even to the city and local level to see, and then just make comparisons amongst their state at different levels. And how many has responded, how many have not, and if within your county, if you were to, as a student, focus just on your local, your locality, it could give you some idea of if we had this many volunteers to go out and help secure those who have not yet responded. This is something that we could, you know, perhaps take a look at. Even taking a look at the tribal land. So I don't know, you know, I don't know what access you have to be given to go on to any of the tribal lands, but just a lot of us may not even be aware of the tribal lands, but just identifying tribal lands. So this in itself is great for math as well as, I think, geography.
Wow, Yvonne, you've raised so many important points. That's great. I love the idea of exploring tribal lands, and just even that question of not knowing if you can go on them or not. You could try to find out, you know, and that would be just a great connecting thing across communities to even just find out, can we even go there? How do we do that? What would it look like? There is a way also up here in the upper left to click on tribal lands and see the census based on tribal lands. I'm not going to click on it right now, but just FYI, you can do that. I also really appreciate something else you said, which is that, you know, how many volunteers would it take to shift our numbers and then track the numbers using this live interactive map? I mean, there's 4 or 5 weeks until September 30th. So you could actually shift your numbers in your tract or in your county. If you got out there, if 10 volunteers talked to 10 families and each of those families had an average of 5 people, I mean, that's, you know, getting into hundreds of people. So you could potentially see the effect of your work on this map. So that would be really cool. So I'm just looking at the chat and I see that John says, this is a great introduction for a class discussion where students can begin to identify barriers to participation. Yes. Why are there participation disparities? Yes, exactly. And like, what's happening with the dark blue cluster in those urban areas? How come those are so much, the self-response rate is so much higher? You know, do they have internet access there? Is it easier? Is it, or, you know, what exactly the questions you're raising? Great. And then somebody else asked about, yeah, did anyone notice this 2010-2020 toggle? You can click on 2010 and it shows you the self-response rate from 2010. So this was the final self-response rate from 2010. You can see it's a bit higher, meaning there's just more blues and a little fewer browns and yellows than 2020. And, you know, hypothesize, as the person suggests, hypothesize about why, you know, what's going on that might have made this be different. So great ideas, people. And then Christine, yes, you want to say something in addition to John's comment? Feel free to unmute.
Yeah, I just, one of the things that I've been, I talked a lot about last year with Lindsay was just the different ways of making thinking visible. And I think even before talking about potential disparities, doing like a see think wonder, just getting them to just make some of those observations without any judgments or any inferencing. Like, I see a lot of blue air, dark blue around the cities, I see a lot of other colors, and just initially kind of looking and seeing what they see on the map, and then generally moving into the thinking, and then the wondering, what might be some reasons why we see the colors like they are. And I just think it would be a great way to like kick off something that's eventually going to be about, looking at some of the differences between the counties and the potential disparities, and that the C is not easy for our students to just to make observations. I see different colors of blue, but it's so important for them to be able to just step back and make some objective observations.
I love that, Christine. That's great. I agree. I often do that as a teacher myself when we're looking at an infographic or just a chart of any kind. It's a different kind of reading. Like your eye does a different kind of thing. When you're reading a text, your eye pretty much just goes left to right, and down the page. But when you're trying to read a map, your eye is going to behave differently, and your mind is going to behave differently. And I love the framing of see, think, wonder. It's just, first of all, just what do you see? And as a teacher, you can really model. A lot of students might clam up and be afraid, oh, I'm supposed to see something. She wants me to see a certain thing. No judgment, like you say. Just what do you observe? And it's really fun when you can free yourself enough to just write down observations, completely judgment-free. I think that's a great skill. Yeah, these are great ideas. Lots of math, lots of kind of reading a visual and practicing reading a visual. Becky says she has a South Dakota perspective. Great, let me hear you, Becky. Can you unmute, and do you want to share that?
I can, and I'd be happy to. Hi to all my Minnesota friends. And thank you for including us in this training. And I am from South Dakota. I'm a teacher in South Dakota, in eastern South Dakota. I was really happy to see my community is dark blue. I live in Huron. But in our state, we have this very kind of unique cultural divide that happens at the Missouri River. And we, in fact, refer to our state as East River or West River. And if you look at the census data, just in terms of map color from East River to West River, really the only blues are clustered around the only metropolitan area in the West. And kind of piggybacking on what Yvonne said, many of those areas that you see in the orange and yellow and brown are our tribal areas. So I'm even thinking in a social studies context for our students, thinking about geographically, culturally, and then politically in our state, there's kind of a divide there too. And looking at even some writing in terms of what does the census data say about kind of what we already know about our identity as either an East River resident or a West River resident, and how we see our state, how we see ourselves as a result of that.
Mm-hmm. Nice. That's going to get you into all sorts of really rich conversations and thinking. And I love bringing up tribal lands here too. I know there's a lot of Native American reservations in this whole area, and thinking about why Native Americans may or may not want to participate in the census is a really important part of critical thinking. You have Indigenous people in your adult ed programs, and so by bringing that in, you're actually giving them a moment of visibility when they might often not feel so visible. You're giving them a chance where, their people can be seen and noticed, and they might have something to add too about this question. So thank you so much from South Dakota. Is there anybody from any other nearby state that we should hear from? Anybody from Wisconsin? North Dakota? Iowa? Okay, well, this was really, really great to hear from teachers. I love hearing your ideas, and I hope that if you do take this back to the classroom, your students will, get a kick out of both playing around in here themselves. They'll get experience reading a key. I think that's a really important part of the literacy experience here is how do you read a key? And how do you toggle, just the whole toggling off and on and making things go back and forth and kind of controlling this map and zooming in and out and all that. Once they get comfortable doing that, and this could be a whole lesson, honestly, when you include the digital literacy skills as well as the content, this could be a great, very rich conversation. I'm just going to stop and read what John says. He says, this map is a great springboard to other historical lessons about the census. For example, the Census Bureau has some great lessons to practice those compare and contrast skills, one that compares the 1790 and 1800 censuses, and one that looks at the census questionnaire from 1900. Oh yeah, great. So the Census Bureau itself, thanks for pointing that out, has a lot of lesson plans on the census.gov. You can just go there and find lesson plans, both for ESOL learners, adults, and also for K-12. So you can draw from anywhere and adapt it for your class. So yeah, thanks for raising that, John. Okay, so let's go back to the PowerPoint. And yeah, we were talking about Indigenous people a little bit and their interface with the census. And, I found this quote from Sidra Starkovich, who's from the Bois Fort Band of Chippewa. And she says, as Indigenous people, we are a little afraid of the government because we've been hurt by the government. So, and they're not the only demographic that has mixed feelings about reporting all their data to the government, right? There's plenty of demographics in this country right now and all throughout history that might feel a little nervous about, reporting to the government, everybody who lives in their family, everybody who lives in their house, might not just be family members, could be any number of people, their ages, their names, and all this private information, and as a census ambassador, being thoughtful about what might get in the way of people filling out the census is a really important ingredient, because we're not trying to, as a census ambassador, force people to do something. We just want to come to everybody like this is their own decision. And you have some information to share about the importance of the census, and you have a perspective to share, but ultimately you acknowledge, it's their own decision. An actual very nitty-gritty obstacle for some people, and again, this is related to Native American people, is that part in the race section of the census, you can check off what race you are, but then you also are supposed to put, the name of your tribe. And a lot of Native people I've heard are really upset when they get this part, they can't fit all the letters in those boxes. And so it just feels like, we literally don't fit. The Census Bureau has not been thoughtful about us. They have not put enough boxes. I mean, literally, like we cannot write the name of our tribe here. And so people, and then there's plenty of other things. I mean, even as a white person, when I filled out my census online, I just checked that I was white, but I didn't put my origins, because honestly, I don't have that much information. I don't really know what my background is. And it wouldn't let me move on until I put something there. So it didn't matter what I put. I honestly don't even remember. I think I might have just put mixed or something. I don't know what I put, but it was interesting to me that it wouldn't let me move on. And that, I don't feel particularly sensitive about that. So it was easy for me to just go back and figure it out. But if you're feeling sensitive about this, or if it's a place where you've been chronically made to feel invisible, it might bring up some feelings where you just feel like, I don't want to do it. It's not for me and I don't want to do it. The whole race section is going to probably bring up feelings for people. There's a lot of tricky stuff in here, including what's the definition of white? Well, it includes, for example, Lebanese people and Moroccan people, for example. I don't know if Moroccan people in the United States really feel like they're white, or if people from the Middle East, like Lebanon, really feel white in this country, but that's what they're supposed to say they are, according to the census. And there's been a lot of community fight back or pushback against the census for how they do the race section. And that's it's an ongoing, evolving issue. How do we identify ourselves by race in this country, especially when you take into account the fact that race is a social construction. I mean, it's a biologically meaningless concept, but it does have social meaning. So one thing a census ambassador may have to do is just support people through this process, because even though the census does not deal with race perfectly, and that's an understatement, it still matters for our communities to get counted. So supporting people to get through a hard part of filling out the document and persisting and just doing it anyway. And you can do whatever you want. If you're on paper, you could just keep writing the name of your tribe down below, or you could just go off the margin and start heading down the side of the paper. I mean, you can just do whatever you want. That's your own little protest in a way. You can just put the full name with pride of your tribe. And then of course on the race section, there is something, you have the option to put other, and then just put in your own words how you identify racially. So there's a lot of ways to answer the question here. So I hope a census ambassador would be kind of clued into this, would be sensitive about it, would be supportive, and help a person persist through the hard part. And I think that this skill is so great for the census ambassador and for the person filling out the form, because how many times in this life do we have to fill out a form that we feel is semi-irrational or makes no sense, or we don't want to fill it out, but we have to, and it makes us mad and it's irritating, but we have to do it anyway, So that process of just kind of persisting through an obstacle and just getting it done, it can be a really great and satisfying thing to do. So, yeah, there's plenty of other parts of the census. I mean, even, gender is an issue. The only genders to choose from are male or female, and some people don't identify as one or the other of those. So what are they going to do? There's a number of places where you could feel stuck, but I think there's still reasons why we might want to, why we want to fill it out. I would like to hear, does this bring up anything for anybody? Does anybody want to add other things that people will be afraid about when it comes to filling out the census? I see Christine talking about immigrants. Yeah, I mean, I think immigrants rightfully quite nervous about it. In fact, the only, well, let me not say the only, but one of the most egregious misuses of census material was around World War II, when local law enforcement agencies use census data to find out people of Japanese ancestry and round them up and put them in detention camps. So, the census has been misused and immigrants have suffered in that way. We're going to talk more about the protections against that. But if people are feeling nervous about filling this out, even if they are not undocumented, meaning they do have legal status here, it's still scary to do. And Christine is saying it's a good idea to address those fears and don't just tell students, oh, just take the sentence, it's no big deal. Yeah, by all means, estimating people's fears or playing them down is really not going to help. People want to feel listened to. And Christine says, I had to catch myself at one point and remember that my experience with systems and government can be so different from the experience of my students. Yeah. We have, if you're a white person or a person with education privilege or other kinds of privilege in this society, it's really good to check yourself and remind yourself that what kind of comes easy for you, or what you feel like you'll be able to, obstacles you'll be able to overcome fairly easily, that may not be true for everybody. Okay, so one other point is that sometimes people feel afraid about reporting all the people who live in their home, because they may be breaking their lease, technically speaking, because they have their cousin whose family was in a house fire and they had nowhere to go, and so that cousin's whole family is now living in your house, kind of breaking the lease. So they don't really want to report everybody, but their information truly is protected, and their landlord will never find out about it from their census. And maybe people even feel a little bit of shame, or they might feel like, well, you know, I'm in a 2-bedroom apartment and I have 10 people living here and I don't want to report that. And so again, we can just patiently try to hear people's concerns and help them fill it out to the best of their ability. Okay, how do you fill out the census? So there's 4 ways to participate, and I put them in order of priority. So the best, easiest, quickest way to do it is online, if you can. The online questionnaire is available in 13 languages, all no native languages online. There is some online support in Navajo, but no other native languages. So you can go to census.gov and find the language that is best for you to fill out the census online. And I want to make it really clear that if you don't have that postcard that you may have gotten months ago with your census ID, don't worry about it. You can still go online and just put your address. When you start to fill out the census, you click, you know, I don't have my ID. And then what it does is it asks you for your address. Now, if you live in a very rural area and you don't have a quote unquote normal street address, you can still put the rural route. You can even, believe it or not, and this might be relevant for you, Becky, I think in South Dakota, if you have people on tribal lands, or this is in any of these states, and it's extremely rural, and there's not even, you know, a street name that you can give, you can put the city, state, and zip, and then you can kind of try to describe your house as best you can. Like it's a certain, you just have a box to type text, and you can say that it's a certain number of miles away from a certain intersection, that it's at the foot of the such and such mountain, that it has a screen porch on the left side, that it has a driveway on the right, that, you know, you can try to describe your house in any way that you can. And so the census is really trying to make it possible for you to fill it out. You can also fill it out on the phone. If you call either of those numbers, I just put the English and Spanish, but there are 12 other languages that you can call the number for that language. And you can talk to a person in that language and fill it out by phone. There's also by mail. So the paper version only has English and Spanish. And you can fill this out. It may have been mailed to you, or it might have been dropped off at your house. That's another way the Census Bureau is doing this. Sometimes they come and knock on your door and they try to fill it out with you in person right there. They're practicing social distancing, of course. When they knock on your door, they step 6 feet back. If you answer the door, they keep social distance, they're masked, and they fill out your information on the tablet that they have with them. But sometimes they're just dropping off the paper copy at your house and asking you to mail it back in. And then finally, in person. Now, the way they're doing that in person is knocking on your door. That's one of the ways. They're also setting up these mobile units where they'll be at a kind of a well-trafficked place, and they'll hang out there with the tablet and fill and get you as you walk by to give the information. Okay, so those are all the ways to fill out the census. And your census ambassadors, you know, really need to know, you know, that basic information. And then there's the questionnaire itself. And I think census ambassadors, obviously it would be great if they filled out their own census questionnaire first. And so if your census ambassadors, the ones that you're coaching to play this role, certainly the first step should be that they fill out their own census. So they've had practice, they've tried it out, they see what it's like, they know how long it takes, they see what's confusing about it. And there are confusing things about it. For people who have filled it out, you know that their questions 1 and 2 for person number 1 are a little bit redundant of each other, and it's kind of confusing. Why are they asking me this again? And again, we just get that practice with document literacy. You know, this doesn't quite make sense, but okay, let me persist. Let me just try to finish this. So if you have filled it out, you know that it asks just 9 questions of person number 1, name, phone number, gender, race, ethnicity, that kind of thing, how many people live with you, whether you rent or own. And then for each subsequent person, persons 2, 3, 4, 5, etc., it asks just 7 questions. And, you know, we should note that you are required by law to fill it out and to fill it out completely. So I don't like to lead with a very fear-based incentive here. You know, if you don't fill it out, you're going to get in trouble with the law. The fact is you're probably not going to get in trouble with the law. I don't think there's too many cases of somebody being prosecuted for not filling out the census. But you are required to fill it out. And if you don't, supposedly they will try to track you down. So they will call you or they will come to your house. And if you don't want somebody coming to your house, you should just go ahead and fill it out. And then you are supposed to fill it out completely. Now, if somebody leaves a question blank, you know, it's not the end of the world. You might get a phone call. They might try to get that information, but they're pretty overwhelmed. They're dealing with COVID too, the Census Bureau. Their workers are not, you know, are having to deal with all that. If you leave something blank, it's probably not the end of the world. But as a census ambassador, again, you don't want to be encouraging anybody to do that. But if somebody does that, I think being relaxed about it is the best way forward. So we brought up the problem of privacy, and people are giving very sensitive information to the federal government. Why should I do this? It's a very good question. Well, one thing to just remind everybody is there is no question about citizenship. There's not even a question about, you know, what country you were born in or anything like that. So there's nothing about that. And people may have in their minds that there's something there because over the summer, I'm sure you remember, the Trump administration was trying to get the citizenship question onto the census, but it was ruled no on that. The Supreme Court ruled no on that. And so that question is not on the census. There is also a law called Title 13, which prohibits personal information that is collected by the Census Bureau from being shared with any government agency or court. So it's supposed to be ironclad. It's just no way can this information be shared in any way, shape, or form. Census workers who come to your house and talk to you have to take a lifetime oath that anything they learn from being a census worker is completely confidential. Also, there's a lot of thinking going on about there's all this data now that's online. And so data can get hacked, computers can get hacked. People can decipher the data and try to learn things. If they dig down really, really deeply, they might be able to figure out something about a neighborhood. They might even be able to figure out who lives where. And, you know, so the Census Bureau, the statisticians who work for the Census Bureau have figured out how to inject noise into the data. So this is a complicated concept that I read some science articles about. I don't totally understand it, but the idea is to preserve the overall aggregates because that's what's important about the census, but to kind of muffle the edges enough that none of the data is traceable to any neighborhood or any family. And finally, civil liberties groups are ready to take action. If there's any indication that some Census Bureau information is going to be misused, there are civil liberties groups all over the country that are poised to do something about it. So these are the protections that are in place, and it's good for census ambassadors to understand these. So what about you as a teacher? I hope that some of you are thinking, okay, this looks interesting. Maybe I'll try to roll this out in my classroom. Maybe you're thinking, we don't have that much time because September 30th is the deadline. Maybe you're thinking, but with this pandemic and everything going on, I don't see how I can focus on this. Actually, let me say something about that. It's true. You know, everybody is probably at maximum stress right now, and teachers and programs are shifting everything to online. Students are having to figure out how to do that. It's depressing, it's a little bit isolating, but there's also positive things about it. And this Census Ambassador training is something that you can do online, that students can carry out the ambassadorship, you know, while maintaining social distancing or by doing it by Zoom or by phone. It's also not the pandemic. It's something other than the pandemic. It's a great content-rich topic that is a distraction from some of the stuff that we've been having to be so immersed in lately. And actually, it's related to the pandemic in this way. Many of the resources available to us in our communities right now are a result of the 2010 census count, right? So what our communities had to be able to deal with this state of emergency is rooted in the count. So the communities that were undercounted in 2010 have fewer resources to deal with this pandemic, and the communities that were more accurately counted have more appropriate amounts of resources to deal with this pandemic. So we need to be counted, because when the next emergency happens, and there will be one, we want our communities to have the resources they need. And this pandemic has shown us, you know, which communities have come out somewhat aligned, you know, their resources are aligned to the emergency, and others where it's really not aligned at all. And that's really meaningful. So you as a teacher might want to take 3 or 4 class periods. I mean, obviously and I'm going to share some actual materials with you. So I'm not going to leave you without any materials. So once you look at the materials, you can map out how many class periods you think you need. You should think about, you know, how to assess your students. And one suggestion is having them role play their work as a census ambassador in the classroom. So seeing students actually act like a census ambassador. And when I say classroom, I obviously mean your distance platform, whatever it is. Your classroom might be by Zoom or Google Classrooms or whatever it is, but people can role play the job of being a census ambassador. And census ambassadors can keep a log, and this is a great assessment tool, because if they turn in their log to you, you'll see not only, you know, that they talked to this many people, but they kept track of, you know, what the questions were that came up, what they needed to do to follow up with that person. And that's a great academic and job skill, right? Tracking your work, being accountable to people you talk to, reporting into the teacher what you did, you know, it's just a really good academic and job skill. I hope as teachers, if you do roll out this training, that you'll give your census ambassadors a chance to reflect back in class on how it went. Because we really want people to come back and go, oh, this happened, it was so embarrassing, I didn't know what to say, and this was the question that somebody asked and I didn't know the answer, or, oh my God, it was so hard because the person right away just hung up on me, or something, you know, whatever happens, you know, just coming back and sharing that, and then they can hear from other students in the class who are being census ambassadors, what happened to them, what did they do about it, you know, and then you develop a sort of horizontal communication in the class where students are sharing with each other, which really builds community, and which is harder to do when we're distance learning, but you know, you're creating a chance for people to do that. And finally, you can have them open their resume on, you could have, if they have it as a Google Doc, they can open it with you and you can work together on this, and they can add under the volunteer work, or maybe they can introduce a new heading on their resume called volunteer work, and they can start populating that heading. So that's a good thing to do too. So I mentioned that I have materials for you, and I do. And because the change agent, you know, we did a whole issue called Stand Up and Be Counted, which is about both the census and the election. And thirdly, other ways of making your voice heard. So that's a great issue of the change agent to check out. But I created lesson packets to go with that issue of the magazine. And one of them is called Become a 2020 Census Ambassador. So this is, you know, possibly the go-to lesson packet for becoming a census ambassador. However, I would caution that it's a kind of a long packet. It was assuming, this was all done pre-pandemic too. So it was assuming people had months of time and, you know, whole last semester to do this. You can check that out, and I encourage you to, but you might also want to consider packet number 20, which doesn't have in the headline that it's about census ambassador, but it's called Help Someone Understand the Census. And that's kind of very similar to what a census ambassador is going to be doing. It's a shorter packet, and it's available at 3 different levels: beginner, intermediate, and more advanced. So this might be a better go-to packet for you. Pick the right level. Maybe you have students, a multi-level classroom, so you can give some of your students one version of the packet and then other students another version, whatever makes sense for them. The articles are the same, but they're adapted slightly, and the activities are more complex for the harder levels. So packet number 20 is a great option. And then, oh yeah, there's also packet 21, but before I show you that, I'm going to show you what's inside packet 20, because I want you to have some idea of the content. Let me pause. I feel like I've been talking a lot. Has anything happening in the chat? Does anybody have any questions so far about what I'm sharing? And even, you know, we could even pause here and just say, let me know how this Census Ambassador thing is looking to you. Are you thinking, are you crazy? I don't have time to do this. Or how can I roll something like this out during this period of time? I would love to hear your doubts, your concerns, or your enthusiasm. I see Ivy saying, this sounds perfect. Thank you so much. I love hearing that, Ivy. Thank you. And are there any other responses though? And I'm happy to be challenged. I mean, one of my favorite things is to hear what the obstacles are going to be for you as a teacher out there on the front lines of our adult ed communities, trying to make something happen that's engaging, that's relevant, that's fun, that teaches basic skills, that meets people's needs. Lindsay says, will we get a link to the PowerPoint? Yeah, actually, we're just gonna, I think we can send a PDF of the slides. If you would like a copy of the PowerPoint, I don't see why. I'd be happy to share that too, because in that way that's easier for you, right? You can just use the PowerPoint in your class. Yeah, Christine says we'll make sure everyone gets it. Sure, yeah, that would be great. I'd be happy for you to have that. So let me show you some of the inside of the content of this packet. This is packet number 20. So because the content comes from the change agent, most of it is student written. I didn't do an introduction to the change agent, but some of you might not know the change agent. It's a magazine that comes out twice a year. We're not publishing in paper anymore, sorry to say. We're just gonna be publishing online. The PDF of our upcoming issues will all be online, and the PDFs of all of our back issues are also online. And the content, and this is what makes the change agent so powerful, is almost 100% written by students. So it's a peer-to-peer magazine. It's for students, by students, and it's teacher-friendly because almost every article has activities that are college and career readiness aligned that make it easy for you as a teacher to bring this into the classroom and teach basic skills based on relevant, engaging content written by a peer. So that's my brief introduction to the change agent. And so here is the lead article about the census. It's by a student from DC, and her name is Jeanette Jimenez. And she just makes this very great declarative sentence: we count us. And the article starts with this little quiz that you can take before you read the article, where you just answer true or false, and you kind of test your understanding about the census. And then you read the article, and then you can go back and see if you got any of the answers right or wrong, and you can kind of correct it. Okay, so that's what I mean by, you know, the articles having activities that you can use. And the answers to the quiz are at the bottom, upside down. So again, trying to make it very teacher friendly. It's just really easy for you to use in the classroom. The second article is not by a student, it's by me. I felt like I had to do this because we didn't have anything on this topic, and I wanted something at a very accessible level. This is, when you see level, and you see this one is level 4, what that refers to is grade level equivalent. And I wanted something that was very accessible that talked about, you know, who counts. And the answer to that is everyone, but, you know, how do we count them? You know, what if my kid is in college, like away at college? Or what if my parent is in a nursing home? Or what if my brother is in the military? Or what if my kids are part-time with me and part-time with their dad? You know, how do I count my kid? So I wanted to kind of get some of that out. Some of the most basic stuff questions that people are going to have. The really easy answer is count everyone who lives with you. Okay. And when we wrote this, you know, the thing to do was you count if they're living with you on April 1st. So if a baby was born on March 30th, they were living with you they were born, they were part of your family on April 1st, so you count them. If they were born on April 2nd, then you didn't count them. If you're filling out the census now, I think you should count your baby who was born last week. So there's some things that are complicated here because the census has shifted so much due to the pandemic. But you basically this article gives you some basics information about who to count and how to count people. And then at the end, you can see it's got a little checklist. You can check, who do I fill out? Who do I count on my census? And then the third article, is there one more? No, this is the third and the last article by a student from Florida who again makes the case for why, why we should be counted. And the two activities at the bottom are about, they go to the question of representation and federal money for your state. So those are the two main reasons, and the activities there help your students kind of gnaw over that. Christy is saying that she's working for the census this year, and there's an informational sheet that shows who you should count. Great. Yeah, the census has a lot of great materials, and you could find a lot of those, print them, get the PDF, share it in your classroom. So yeah, and that's another source of information. Thank you, Christy. Ivy asks, it's one of the change agent and how you organize it is one of the most powerful tools we could bring to ESL students. Great, thank you, Ivy. I'm so glad to hear that. And Christy is correcting me. No, you only count people on April 1st. Yeah, okay, sorry, Christy, you're too, yes, okay, so is that right? So if your baby was born in August, July, June, May, you don't count them. You only count if your baby was born before April 1st. Thank you for that clarification. Okay. One more lesson packet. Lesson packet 21 is a little training about how to fill out the paper questionnaire. And what I did was I actually recreated the Census Bureau's questionnaire, and I tried to make it look, exactly like the Census Bureau's version. And this way a student could practice filling it out on paper. And then when they go to fill it out, the real questionnaire, they'll have a copy that they could even copy from. But this way, if a student filled out the questionnaire a long time ago and they already can't remember what's in it, they could get another chance to practice it, to really own it, to feel like they get it really well, and they go out to be a census ambassador. They feel confident. Okay. Here's another practice that we created at World Education when we were getting ready to roll out all of our census materials. This is an online practice questionnaire. So we actually, again, tried to model it exactly on the Census Bureau's questionnaire. It looks very close to what it looks like from when you go to census.gov. And you can, we're not going to do it right now. I was thinking I might send you on another field trip and have you look at this, but instead you'll get the tiny URL for this and you can check it out. But you could have your students do this in your classroom. They could fill it out online. Then they're getting the digital literacy skills for filling something out using the back and the next button, or previous and next. You don't want to use the back button on your browser because that doesn't work. You also need to finish it. The Census Bureau wants you to finish it in one go. If you stop and go back later, you'll have to start over again. So there's things like that that are helpful to practice online. Okay, let me see. I see a long chat here from Maya. She says that in her intermediate class, we talked about the census right before we went to stay-at-home order in March. And I think now 5 months later, with new and old students in the class, we could revisit and have students interview each other. Great idea. Did you fill out the census? How many people are in your family? Did you fill it out online or on paper? You can make a graph either together on Zoom or whiteboard, and then use the graphic to generate sentences and discussion. Yeah, these are great ideas. That's a great idea. And then that could be a platform for launching the Census Ambassador training, because depending on the answer to that, it may really get people excited to say, let me go out and try to, get more and more people, even outside my family, to fill out the census. Great idea. All right, so let's just review what a census ambassador is going to learn. They're going to learn the census basics, which we've covered here today. They're going to learn about privacy and how privacy is protected. they're going to learn a lot of speaking, listening, and leadership skills. This is so important for our students. I can't tell you how many times my students have said to me, you know, wow, I don't know if my English is any better, but I feel so much more confident now. You know, and of course their English is better, but they're not feeling it necessarily. But the thing that they're feeling is that they can go talk to people. And that is so meaningful in their lives. They can go talk to their kid's teacher. They can go to their HR department. I mean, one time when I was doing a workplace-based class, I had my students develop a question for the HR department and then go to the HR person and ask the question. That was literally the activity. And that was such a big deal. People had to get over so much fear to be able to go do that and ask the question and then get the answer and then bring it back. But they were so jazzed about it. I mean, it really shifted their whole orientation to the HR department, just having that one activity. And it shifted their orientation to a lot of things just in their private life where they need to take leadership, but it was hard or embarrassing because they felt worried about their English. So being a census ambassador, and many of our students might even be a census ambassador in their own language, and they might be talking to people who speak, you know, their first language with them. And so they don't even have to do it in English, but just doing it at all is just going to be a great chance to develop their sense of mastery of a certain kind of content and their importance, the importance of their perspective and their information that they have to share and just their connection to people. And then when they have to answer questions, or they might have to say, oh, I don't know the answer to that question, which is a really important academic skill and a really important job skill, being able to say, oh, I don't know, but let me find out, you know. Responding flexibly to different people's concerns, bringing those concerns back to the class, processing it with people, and then going back and trying again. These are really good academic skills and work skills. And then the accountability piece, which I already talked a little bit about, but that idea of reporting the results of your work. I mean, that you can feel really excited. You know, you're keeping your log, you're noticing, oh, now I've talked to 10 people, and now I've talked to 20 people. That's just a feeling of accomplishment. And then reporting that back to people and getting affirmation from people, you know, it just could be really exciting. So I want to say too, that if somebody in your class, so say you decide to do this training, what if somebody in your class doesn't want to be a census ambassador and they say, great, thanks a lot, teacher, but I don't really want to do this. And you know, you can't make me type thing. That's fine. They don't have to be a census ambassador. They really don't. I mean, that does not have to be the whole point. That is that's the project-based learning part of it. That's where the learning gets to take place in something rooted in real life, which I think inspires learning and inspires persistence. But if somebody doesn't want to do it, they're still going to get all this knowledge, this additional vocabulary, a lot of reading opportunities, writing opportunities, speaking and listening. They can still do the role play. You can still tell them, you're learning a lot of basic skills here. So even if you don't want to be a census ambassador, that's fine. You're still, as a teacher, I chose this training because you're going to see your basic skills improve, and you're going to gain knowledge of US government and lots of vocabulary. So I think that it's important as a teacher to be aware of that and share that with your students. Now, from what I understand from the teachers who have been doing this training, the hardest part is getting people to feel comfortable to act as census ambassadors. It's one thing, you know, learn the information in the classroom, maybe even role play it in the classroom, and people kind of know each other, they laugh, but then going out into real life and talking to your neighbor about it, that's hard. So I'm hoping that I can get some ideas from you. What would you do to help your students feel comfortable? Say you've taken them through this training and now comes the time where, you know, they're going to go out and try it out. What are some strategies for helping them feel comfortable? You can use the chat, or you can unmute if you want. And like any good webinar presenter, I do have a slide that includes some strategies for how to help students get comfortable, but I want to give you a chance to share some. So Elizabeth says, write an elevator speech about the census and practice giving it. That's a great idea. Love that. How long is an elevator speech? What floor are we going to? How quickly do I need to get in the major points? Go out in 10. In teams. Go out in teams. Yes, that's a great idea. You don't have to be alone. You can go out with a buddy. And if it's somebody you're quarantining with, great. You don't have to do the social distancing. But you could go out with somebody that you're not quarantining with if you're properly masked and keeping social distance and figuring out, how to support each other from a distance and do this whole thing safely. Becky says, we like to bring strangers into the classroom. We're in a safe environment, but students get to practice with people they don't know while getting support from teachers. That's a great idea. That's really good. And then, if it's somebody you don't know, they might ask you a harder question. They might challenge you more, and they haven't been through the whole class with you, so they don't know what you already know. So, they might stump you. And believe me, I think a really important part of being a census ambassador is that ingredient where you feel like you understand, you have some level of mastery over this content, but you don't have to identify as an expert. There is no reason why you have to be an expert. What else can we do to help students get comfortable? I want to, just going back to Yvonne's point, being in teams, even if you're doing something on Zoom, I don't know about where you are, but around here, people are going to church on Zoom. Some people are having drive-up church. You drive up in your car. Other places of worship are figuring out how to meet, but not in person. For example, maybe a PTA is meeting in Zoom. Other kinds of community meetings are happening by Zoom. You could ask for 10 minutes of meeting time. You could ask to be on the agenda, and you could give a little pitch. And you could have somebody backing you up. So you didn't, you could, the two of you could be on the Zoom, and you could say to your friend, did I forget anything? Should I add anything? Do you want to add anything? And then that you kind of have each other's minds to go off of. Okay, well, if anybody has anything else to add, feel free to put it in the chat, but I'll just share some of my thoughts about how to get people comfortable. So role play, we already talked about that, but here's an important ingredient, and that is getting feedback and then trying again. So feedback this is another academic and very important job skill, is giving and receiving feedback. At work, you need to be able to talk to others about how you're doing at your job, how they're doing at their job. You need to be able to give feedback in a constructive and positive way that is still real. So it doesn't mean, giving feedback doesn't mean saying, you did great. Well, that's nice too. But what was great about it? Being able to be concrete and give detailed information about what went well and what didn't go so well. And then the person has a chance to learn from that and then try again. Doing those iterations it's like writing drafts. We encourage in a writing class that, you're going to need to write multiple drafts to end up with a good piece of writing. So this is sort of like practicing that, predicting questions and concerns. So if you sit around and kind of brainstorm, well, what do you think the questions are going to be? Then you're more prepared for those questions. So you feel more confident and more comfortable going out. Being ready, being okay to say, I don't know. Practice opening the pledge. So this is something I haven't gone into great detail yet, but I have a slide coming up about it. So I mentioned that if you're a census ambassador, you get a $20 gift card, but there's more. For each person that you talk to and who takes the pledge to be counted, you can get an extra $1. So if you talk to 10 people and they take the pledge, then you could get a $30 gift card. So this is this little extra incentive. The trick is that the person has to actually go to this tiny URL and take the pledge. It's very straightforward and easy to do, and I'll show you more about that. But if you have the pledge sort of ready, or if you've texted them the link and then they can fill it out right away, then that's going to help you as a census ambassador. And then also I just think it's really good to remember why you're doing this. If you feel uncomfortable, you feel discouraged, maybe you don't want to do it, but if you can remember why it matters to your community and that it's actually helping you build your leadership and your speaking and listening skills, it might inspire you to kind of get over that hump, to move a little bit out of your comfort zone and just get out there and do it. So Census Ambassador trainings have been happening in different ways all across the country. And one of the big early users of this concept is in San Mateo County, and they developed lots and lots of materials, including lots of role play ideas. So I wanted to share the link to their toolkit in case you find some interesting resources there. And then I wanted to also just share some tips for census ambassadors, because especially now that we're in the pandemic here, it's harder to think about how to do it. So one idea is just pick up the phone and call people and then stay on the line with them while they fill out the census. You know, it doesn't take that long. And, you know, it could really make a difference. If you have them on, you're both on speakerphone and the person's clicking through the fields and you're kind of supporting them to just keep filling it out. That could actually mean a whole census gets done, you know, because somebody supported them to do it. You could hold a drive-in meeting at a location where there's public internet. So how about this? So not everybody has internet access. And so what if you had everybody come to a meeting place? Sometimes people are even if you don't have a library that makes their internet available to guests, or some other business that makes their internet available to guests, you can call a business and ask them if they would. You could say, I'm doing this census drive, and if you could make your internet available, I will have people in the parking lot at this hour, and we're going to all be trying to fill out the census on our phones or our laptops, and they need to be able to log in to do it. And, you know, you could kind of set something like that up. So again, that's just, you know, there's different strategies for the pandemic calls for us to have to be really creative. You want to be a good listener if you're a census ambassador. You know, you don't want to just come at people and dump a lot of data on them or information. You want to hear their concerns, because when people feel listened to, you know, they're just a lot more open to what you have to say. And be passionate about the census, but don't be bossy. People need to make up their own minds. We're on this ambassador theme at the Change Agent. We are just also developing a voting ambassador lesson packet because we're thinking that the model really works. And if students could act as census ambassadors and try to encourage their peers to take the census, maybe they could also act as voting ambassadors, and they could encourage people to vote. And of course, it's really important to be really passionate about voting, but not tell people who to vote for, you know? So that's a place where you can learn that style, that quality of not completely tamping your energy and enthusiasm and passion down. You can have that passion, but, you know, keep in mind that people are going to make their own decision about what to do in the end. So another good skill. So here are the tiny URLs for how to take the pledge to be a census ambassador. And by filling that out, you get the $20 gift card. And then the extra dollar per pledge, per pledgee, is a different tiny URL. So, and when they fill out, when you ask somebody to take the pledge to be counted, this is what it looks like to them. And see, the only red asterisked field is the first name. So they don't have to give tons and tons of information, but they do need to fill out the third field, which is the name of the census ambassador that you talked with, so that you can get credit. So let's take Ivy, for example, who's on our webinar here with us today. If Ivy's acting as a census ambassador and she talks to, let's say, Yvonne, then Yvonne needs to fill out the pledge to be counted, and Yvonne can just put her first name, Yvonne, and then she puts Ivy and the name of the census ambassador, so that the good people at the National Coalition for Literacy, when they're getting ready to send out gift cards, will count up all the people where it says, oh yeah, Ivy was my census ambassador. And so they'll count up how many times Ivy is listed as a census ambassador, and they'll give $1 per one of those. Okay. Any questions about that? Does that feel complicated at all? Or it's a lot of steps, I realize, you know. And if people don't fill out that, if they don't have people take that pledge, they'll still get the $20 gift card. So. Okay, there's a couple things in the chat. Let's see. Astrid saying she likes the idea, and Ivy says that sounds great. Good. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. It's been good to hear from you all today. And I just have a couple more things to share, a couple more slides. This is a slide just showing the Census Ambassador log, which is a Word doc, which you can download and adapt however you want. If you don't like how I set it up, you can set it up a different way. But I kind of tried to create a little, like a tracker idea, so that your students, they could have this in hard copy, or they could have it, saved on their computer, and they could fill it out. Who did you reach out to? What were their main questions? Did they take the pledge to be counted? And then what are your next steps? You might need to follow up with them. Maybe you sat there and did the census with them right then, so you don't need to follow up with them, whatever. So this is what the log could look like. And, we love being recognized. We all do. Not only can students add this to their resume, but you could recognize them with a certificate that they worked as a census ambassador in their community. And you could have it be signed by you, the teacher, by the principal of your school, however you want to do it. But I encourage you to think about that and to really honor the work that students do, because this is a lot. This is a big deal, and students often talk about really feeling seen when they get a certificate like that. I've already mentioned a lot of this, but let's just review that the coronavirus makes this training, I think, even more important. For one thing, it helps us be civically engaged during this pandemic, which the pandemic has invited so much isolation and so much, discouragement. I mean, it's just been such a painful time. So this activity gets us outward looking and connected, and also just being civically engaged, because what's happening in our communities with the pandemic is a civics matter. It's related to how our communities are set up. And so being able to be outward facing during this time is a really good practice. The resources that our communities are going to be destined to get as a result of the census are going to help prepare us for future emergencies. The digital tools that you would use as a census ambassador are really good training for all the other things that have gone remote in our lives during the pandemic. So it might help your student just feel that much more comfortable supporting their kid through their distance learning, or whatever else they're doing in the world that is now happening by Zoom. And just overall being connected with others breaks down isolation, and that's a good thing, during a pandemic or not. So we have a community of practice at World Education where people who are census ambassadors can join this community of practice and can talk to other teachers. You can talk to me in there. You can get a discussion forum going. You can download resources. And actually, Christine, I'm springing this on you, but if you wouldn't mind grabbing that tiny URL for joining the COP, that would be great. You can click on that, and you can you'll get an invitation from Ebony Vandross in our office, who will invite you to join the community of practice. So that's an option for you if you want, just another place to get resources and to check in with people. So let's just think about next steps at this point. Here's what I would propose. If you're interested in doing this, I would say join the community of practice. Plan your classes. Support your students to start doing the work ASAP. So this isn't a leisurely activity. You might even as you're rolling out the training, people might start doing the work a little bit. There's just very limited time, unfortunately. When we planned this webinar, the deadline for the census was October 31st. And then a couple weeks ago, they changed it to September 30th. So I quickly called, Astrid and Patsy, and I said, what should we do? And, there wasn't really much we could do. So, but that's why it's such a time limited situation. But previously we thought, oh, people will have 2 months to do this. That's pretty reasonable, but now you just have 1 month. So yeah, keep in touch with me, with people if you don't join the community practice, feel free to email me and just be in touch. I love to hear about anything that's happening, any challenges or any positive things. It's just good for me I take that as feedback, and it helps me, refine my work in this way, because I want to be creating activities that work for you and your students. So a reminder about the prizes. One really important thing is that when the Census Ambassador fills out that pledge to be a Census Ambassador, they really have to put their address. So that's not optional. If they want to get the debit card, it's going to be a literal physical debit card, and it's going to get sent to them by mail. So they need to put their address. And then I just put the two tiny URLs again for taking the Ambassador Pledge and the individual pledge. And then I just thought it's kind of nice to end on this note. Some communities, especially Native communities, but I think many marginalized communities, in some ways, this saying works for people. Our existence is resistance. And just that means just by existing, by continuing to live, by continuing to thrive, that is a form of resistance. And so being counted, showing that you're here, is a really significant step. And I wanted to just end on that note that Census Ambassadors are playing a big role in reminding this country that we're here. So the final slide is key resources, and these are all links that you'll get when you receive a copy of the PowerPoint and or PDF of the slides. They'll all be clickable, and you can easily get them that way. So let me check back on the chat. Ivy says she loves the certificates idea. Great. Thank you. She says, you guys always think of everything. I'm always impressed and never disappointed. That's nice. Thanks. Others, I hope you'll write in questions or concerns. Alejandro says, this is awesome presentation. Such a great tool for engagement of English language learners in civics education. Thanks, Astrid, for the opportunity to join in. All right. Okay, so, and Christine, thank you for putting the tiny URL for the community of practice. That's tinyurl.com, join COP. We have a little bit of time if there's any other questions. If there's not, I'm gonna put in my email address just one more time, so you can all reach me if you need to. Did I type it right? I think so. cpeters@worlded.org. I'd love for you to check out the Change Agent. I'd love for you to check out our next issue of the magazine, which is coming out the first week of September or so. It's on the pandemic. It's a really powerful issue. I think your students are gonna love it. You're gonna love it. And then another thing that I wanna make a quick plug for is your students could write for our spring 2021 issue. I'm gonna be putting out a call for articles in the next couple of weeks. Our theme is something along the lines of mental health, managing stress, something like that. We're going to be soliciting articles on that topic. So if you have students who would like to write for the magazine, I'd love to get more submissions from Minnesota, South Dakota, North Dakota, Wisconsin. I don't get too many from that part of the country, so I would love to change that up. It has been so great to be here with you today. Thank you all so much for going through all that material with me so patiently, and for all of your comments. It's just been really great to hear. It's a very lively and creative crowd. So I hope that you'll consider rolling out this training and that you'll be in touch with any questions or comments that you have. Are there any final things we should say, Astrid or Christine?
Just want to thank you so much, Cynthia, for joining us and sharing these resources, and for everyone who was able to join us here today, and for sharing your ideas in the chat. We hope that when you get the information and the slides in your email, you will find a lot of ways to use it with your learners and pass it along to your colleagues who weren't able to join us today. So thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much, Cynthia. This webinar was awesome. And I can tell from the chat box that other people think it was really awesome too.
Great.
So thank you so much.
All right. Well, again, many thanks to you, and we'll see you out there.
I think we can stop the.
Bye, everyone.